Day. Now let's be direct. We've had a number of conversations about the American experience, and it's not perfect. Many folks in this room have experienced unfairness. We've all experienced unfairness at some levels, some of us much worse and much more invidious, and there's no getting around that. Let's just talk about our founding documents, which we'll be discussing shortly. There are wonderful truths that we aspire to, but we have to acknowledge, don't we? Let's just be direct. When those words were written, unless you were a white, property-owning male, you did not enjoy the full benefits of citizenship in America. That's how it was. We're not proud of that, but that's the truth. Aren't you glad, though? Aren't you glad that American history has been about expanding that circle of liberty, right? To bring more and more people into the full protection of laws, the full enjoyment of the American dream. Are we there yet? Of course we're not there yet, but we want to do our part to preserve this system. And yes, to talk about our history, warts and all, but to present it truly and accurately, especially those founding principles which have made America so special and which continue to allow us to overcome great challenges and to increase that circle of liberty. And so that's what this substitute adds: protections to ensure that students have the freedom to discuss a wide range of topics and opinions without retribution. Students can bring topics up and discuss them. Fourth, this substitute applies the guidelines for discussing current events as well as the limitations on attaining course credit for social policy, advocacy, or public policy advocacy to all the required K-12 curriculum. Fifth, the substitute clarifies that students may earn course credit or extra credit when they participated in charitable activities, even if that organization is also engaged in policy advocacy. The substitute also adds prohibition on teachers promoting the 1619 Project and, just to be direct, the incorrect interpretation of history that it espouses. Finally, the substitute narrows the prohibition against private funds being used to purchase or develop curriculum materials only to that critical race theory list and to public policy advocacy.
Thank you. Senator Hughes, I have a few questions. I was listening to you, and in this new floor substitute that we just received, will teachers still have to provide a neutral stance when discussing topics such as slavery, genocide, terrorism, lynching, or white supremacy?
Well, Senator, I want to be clear that I'm getting it right. It's not a matter of neutral stance. What the teachers are asked to do, and what we all try to do, and let me make sure I get this right. What they are asked to do is to the best of the teacher's ability, strive to explore the topic. When they're talking about current events, this is in the context of current events. I'm on page 5.
Right.
A teacher who chooses to discuss a topic of current event, widely debated, currently controversial issue, public policy, social affairs, it says the teacher shall, to the best of their ability, strive to explore that topic from diverse and contending perspectives without giving deference to any one perspective. Of course, American history, Texas history will be taught, warts and all, our mistakes, our failures, how we overcame them. But it is important. Senator West and I talked about those different perspectives. And Senator, these topics are so sensitive, but let's just talk about one. Interaction with the police. Folks from different communities in Texas that grew up different ways have very different views of interaction with police. Some folks have had bad experiences, or maybe they have friends or family that have had bad experiences, and that affects the way they approach the police. Others haven't had that experience. Don't you think it's important that when these materials are presented, that those different perspectives are given? So we're asking the teachers, we're directing them to the best of their ability to strive to explore the topic from diverse and contending perspectives. So I think that's what you're talking about. That's that language in the bill.
So what I'm specifically asking, and I don't think I've heard you answer yet, was would teachers have to provide a neutral stance on incredibly divisive things like slavery, genocide, terrorism?
Senator, that is not in the bill. No, sir.
Okay. That's one of the things that was concerning to me. Page 6 of your bill, if you look at lines from line 7 down through 27, it appears that we try to prescribe to them almost what they can say. It seems a little bit it could be found insulting and unnecessary. And so,
Senator,
go ahead.
The materials on those particular lines, that's largely what has given rise to this bill, because across America and across Texas, those are being taught. Those principles are being taught as truth. And as you know, Senator, that's just, you and I know that an individual should not be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely or partly because of their race or sex. An individual's moral character is not necessarily determined by their race or sex. So because those things are being taught, and sadly there's evidence in Texas public schools is happening, that's why we have to do this. It's not, I can't imagine teachers I know doing that. You probably can't either.
No.
It's happening.
Would a traumatic local community or school event be included in a discussion, even if it was deemed necessary by school or district leaders, for the students to be able to process in a healthy way? If something happened, a current event, would they be allowed to have that discussion?
They would be allowed, Senator, under this bill. And I'm glad you mentioned our teachers and their discretion, because if you notice the language, for example, the language on the top of page 5 is the operative part on line 2. A teacher may not be compelled to discuss a particular current event or widely debated and currently controversial issue of public policy or social affairs. We are saying that the teacher cannot be forced to do that. Then it says if a teacher chooses to, that's when they have the discussion you and I went over earlier. So no one is forbidding the teacher from talking about current events or hot topics of the day. We are making sure that the teachers aren't compelled to take a position like that.
This is interesting here on that section there in section 2 on page 5.
Yes, sir.
When you start on line 5, where it says, a teacher who chooses to discuss a topic described by subdivision 1 shall, to the best of the teacher's ability, strive to explore that topic from diverse and contending perspectives without giving deference to any one perspective. So, how do you discuss slavery without giving deference to any one perspective, or the Holocaust for that matter?
Well, Senator, to make sure we're clear, this section describes current event or widely debated and currently controversial issue public policy. Okay. As for historical matters, there is no limit whatever on those discussions. This is on hot current.
How will you enforce this? Let's say you have a teacher whose parents, because I have friends whose parents went through the Holocaust, were prisoners of war, and they want to talk about people who are chanting anti-Semitic views, and they get frustrated and upset, and they only talk about how horrible white supremacy is or defamation of any group is, and they don't provide deference to any one perspective. They're very much one-sided. How do you enforce that if someone gets upset about it?
Senator, under current law today, when teachers in the classroom take positions and parents find out about it, if the teacher is not following the TEKS, if the teacher is not following the law, already teachers are held accountable to follow the law and to follow the TEKS. So that's already happening today. What we're doing here is giving some guidelines so that when those topics come up, the teacher will have some guidance to follow. This is always going to be an issue. I mean, even today, as you know, we put TEKS in place. There's certain things that teachers cover. And obviously there are certain things that are not appropriate for the classroom, obscenity, things like that. And this is nothing new, but this is supposed to give us some guidelines to discuss sensitive topics.
Concern is that there are some potentially racial divisive views being espoused. Is that it?
Senator, I want to be precise. What's happening right now, there are teachings out there, and they're being taught in some Texas public schools that say one race or sex is inherently superior to the other. You and I don't believe that. We know that's not true, but that's being taught. In fact, I can read it to you out of this book if you'd like for me to. Or it's being taught.
How did that book get into the classroom?
This was provided to students, Highland Park ISD, and
but who brought it to
a teacher provided this to students.
One teacher?
As far as I know, that's right. I've also got some news articles you've probably seen from Fort Worth ISD, Leander, from Frisco ISD, Richardson ISD, Austin, across the state where challenges like this.
If I understand you correctly, and this will be my last question on, and I'm going to let others speak, but we're responding, this legislation that you are sponsoring and trying to pass into law is a response to a teacher who's providing a view, which is incorrect, that one gender or one race is responsible for everything. But what about, do you think it couldn't be in response to all of the harmful things that are going on in America today, all of the unnecessary deaths, all of the things that are being espoused against multiple races? Do you not think that that's why we're dealing with this?
Senator, I know you and I agree that how we respond to those things, it matters, it means everything. And so if we don't respond to these horrible things, if we don't respond to these with these American ideals that we all aspire to, if we abandon those and we go to this level, we can't imagine how bad that'll be for these children and for the future of our country. If we don't live tie these ideas and make sure the truth is being taught about what we aspire to as Americans. We're not there. We haven't gotten there yet, but that's what we aspire to. And to suggest that our very country and our institutions are so infused with racism that we can never overcome that. Respectfully, I know you and I don't believe that. I know you don't believe that. We're living proof that's not true.
And so your main intent or your purpose for this is to correct something that you see as wrong?
Senator, that's exactly right. And you probably know scholars on the left and the right have come out against these teachings. The idea that the American War for Independence was for the perpetuation of slavery. It's not the war between the states. But this teaching in the 1619 Project says our war for independence was primarily to promote and protect slavery. And scholars on the left and right have come out and said that's factually wrong. That's wrong. And I think we agree that the facts need to be taught right. And especially when we're talking about those American principles that we all rely on, that we all revel in, and that allow us to overcome adversity and to do better. And so, yes, ma'am, there are certain things that should not be taught. They're the things that are not true. And if we get those fundamentals wrong, if we get that foundation wrong, our children will suffer for it and our country will suffer for it. I do believe that.
And I'll just speak from personal experience.
Sure, please do.
My sister does implicit bias trainings in New Orleans. And I attended one of hers. They're very interesting because they teach us that we all have biases and presumptions of superiority. So if you just presume with me that a implicit bias training does present concepts that all individuals have bias and that most individuals also have some illusions of superiority, would that be a concept that is prohibited by H3?
Senator, that would not be prohibited. That would not be prohibited.
I am so glad to hear that.
Oh, thank you. And I'm with you. This is about, if I may say, this bill is intended to help us deal with those things and grapple with those things you're describing.
2.3a says, an appreciation of A, the importance and responsibility of participating in civic life.
Yes.
But the bill prohibits giving credit for participating in civic life. Correct?
Well, Senator, the bill provides that students will be given training in these areas, giving simulations. It also says they'll get course credit for charitable work, gives example of community gardens, that is Meals on Wheels, things like that. But yes, it does say that course credit, that students can't be compelled to work for a campaign or given course credit for it, so that our school children wouldn't be used as arms or as tools of political campaigns, but there certainly will be learning about the process. And again, they can participate on those things, but the teacher or the school cannot compel them to or give them course credit for it.
And then it goes on to say in 3B, a commitment to the United States and its form of government, but the bill prohibits credit for involvement in a form of government.
Well, the bill prohibits a student being compelled or given credit for getting involved in political campaigns, but certainly they're taught about our form of government, and they're specifically taught how to interact with government at different levels and what their role is, and really what self-government's about. I want to make sure I'm following the question. I don't quite get it. I'm sorry.
You're a teacher, and you're trying to teach this very current event with regard to the disproportionality of African Americans who are killed in altercations with the police. And it's disproportionate because African Americans represent 13% of the population overall, and yet they're killed at twice the rate of who's in interactions with the police. It's a comparison.
Oh, yes,
right?
ma'am. You bet.
So,
you bet.
Whites are not killed disproportionate to their percentage of population. So would a teacher in that circumstance be running afoul of adopting a concept that an individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress on account of the individual's race or sex?
If the student were being taught that because of the student's race, that student is therefore responsible for bad acts by members of the same race, that would be a problem. But if we're presenting facts, difficult facts, of course, I hope there's going to be an emotional response. When we see something horrible that's happening, of course we should react to that. But the student should not be taught that just because people of your race did this, you are therefore responsible. If I understand you correctly, that's what's being proposed.
Well, in this case, it's probably gender, because the CDC says that 1 in 8 female teenagers have been the victim of dating violence, whereas 1 in 26 male teenagers have. So is that adopting a concept that makes male teenagers feel bad because they're males and feel responsible for dating violence committed by other males in the very recent past, sometimes even on their same football team?
Senator, not unless you're telling those male students that they are responsible for what different male students do. That'd be the only way that would be done.
If a teacher is teaching wage discrepancies, wage discrimination in America, does that run afoul of making people feel uncomfortable or shame or guilt for their gender? If a teacher teaches 80 cents on the dollar made by women as compared to men?
Of course not, unless the teacher is saying that all men are responsible for what other men do, and I don't think they would be teaching that. I hope they wouldn't in a course like that.
Well, how did it get that way? Do you think women were advocating that women make 80 cents on the dollar?
Well, I think what's described here is the teaching that you, male student, or you, female student, should feel bad because of what other females do. That's the teaching that's being forbidden. It's not saying you should tell bad things that are happening so students can respond and can know how to deal with those things. I think we're saying the same thing, but I want to make sure I'm understanding your question.
I think it strains credibility to present the fact that women make 80 cents on the dollar and not imply that men are responsible for that, because certainly women didn't advocate that they make 80 cents on the dollar.
Well, Senator, maybe I am confused. You're not suggesting that all men are responsible for the fact that some men don't treat their employees right, are you?
The language of your bill is very broad. Adopt a concept that an individual, by virtue of the individual's race or sex, bears responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of the same race or sex.
So the point is that as individuals, we are responsible for our own actions, and we should bear responsibility for our own actions. That's the fundamental concept flowing through that section.
Do you recall a quote by Winston Churchill that those who fail to learn from the past are condemned to repeat it?
I do. I'm kind of a redneck. I didn't know Churchill said it, but I've heard the quote, and it's true.
He was actually quoting someone else, but...
Okay, I feel better then. Thank you.
Yeah. One last thing. The provision, which is a great provision, which I was really happy to see in the first part of the bill under the first section, under 4, media literacy. Wow, this is so important. Media literacy, including instruction on verifying information and sources and identifying propaganda as appropriate for the grade level. And this is the part that concerns me. And consistent with the restrictions under section 28.002H3. It's curious, H3B is such a wonderful opportunity to exercise media literacy. So why exclude specifically the Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times series that has come under so much scrutiny by historians, the 1619 Project?
Well, Senator, it's come under scrutiny by historians because there are fundamental factual errors and serious problems with real basic American concepts. And as you know, scholars from the left and the right have been very critical of that. And again, to suggest that America is so racist at its core as to be irredeemable, and to suggest that people based on the color of their skin can never overcome biases and can never be fair, can never treat each other fairly, that's a real problem. And again, there's some very troubling things. And I haven't read all of the essays in the 1619 Project. I've been through a number, looked at a lot of it. I don't know, you may have read it. Again, it was so serious that the author of this at a school not known for its conservatism was put on hold for tenure after the questions arose. The fact checker, the professor, not a conservative professor, fact checker, criticized the way the material was presented and said there were problems. It's a real problem.
So it sounds like an absolutely fabulous opportunity, learning opportunity on media literacy, and why not throw in other things like, for instance, the big steal in the Trump presidential election?
Well, Senator, the list here talks about what the SBOE shall consider with, the TEA and the SBOE, and it gives a baseline of concepts to include. It specifically addresses these concepts that are so false that go to the heart of our democracy, and in between, it's left to the TEA and the state board to develop. And of course, those are the state board, the folks who are elected to work at those details.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
You referred to a book a little while ago, Not My Idea. A book about whiteness. I want to clarify, did you understand that was part of a curriculum at some school?
I understand it was recommended to students by teachers at Highland Park. I said that's how it was represented to us. Yes, and again, you and I know Highland Park is a great school. We're not picking on Highland Park, but that happens to be where this one came from.
I just wanted to bring up as a factual matter, and I've investigated this. I don't know where you got your information about it being used in the school, but it has never been part of any curriculum ever, and it's not listed as being ever in circulation of any library in the Highland Park district. So who might be saying that came from that school? Because it doesn't appear to be relevant to this discussion, I think is really my point here. If it's not part of the curriculum and it's not part of the library, do you think it has any relevance to this discussion today?
Senator, if it's being recommended to students in Texas public schools, of course it's relevant.
But if it's not being recommended to students in Texas public schools, it's not relevant, right?
Well, Senator, I don't know what would happen to this book if it weren't going to be for students. I mean, you can tell by the way it's written and by its format, that's the audience it's geared toward.
Somebody geared it towards an audience, but it's not an audience at a school in my district. So unless you know of it being offered in a different district, I'm not seeing its relevance.
Well, I think you said it's not on any curriculum.
Nor in a library in that school district.
And so if a parent,
any other.
If a parent has represented that this was recommended to students there, That's what we have to go by. Let me assure you, Senator, I didn't publish the book. I didn't make it up.
No, and you weren't given the book by a school district, but I think it's dangerous. If we're going to be making grand state policy, it ought to be on something other than some parent saying, hey, some teacher told my kid to read this book. And if a teacher somewhere at some school did hand a book to a kid, that's a far cry from saying that critical race theory or anything else is now part of a public school curriculum. It's one teacher, one book, one kid in one district at one time at best, and we don't even know if that's true, right?
Richardson ISD, Southlake ISD, Leander ISD, there's other Frisco ISD.
Did what?
Other stories, other media stories where parents testified about this, where, my goodness, there was an election in the Carrollton ISD on the school board about this very issue. So this book happens to have been reported to come from Highland Park ISD. I'm not picking on you or Highland Park.
So let's just have a clear record.
And I don't blame you for saying this book isn't relevant, because sadly it's very relevant to this discussion. It's horrible. It's horrible. And I know, and Senator, I know you're not for this. I get that. I know you're not for this.
I just want to have a clean record that this is not part of the curriculum at Highland Park ISD, nor is it found in the library at Highland Park ISD. Some kid might have gotten their hands on it.
I'll take your word for it.
Just want to clarify that, because if you're wondering what they're teaching in my district, that book's not it.
Good.
Thank you, Senator Hughes.
Senator Hughes, would you agree that it's important that young people learn how to advocate for their concerns and with their elected officials?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And is there any evidence that shows getting course credit for an internship with a legislator or an advocacy group has some kind of negative impact on a child's education?
Well, Senator, this bill seeks to make sure that a student is not pressured, coerced, or dangled course credit for getting involved on a certain issue, a certain campaign. So, of course, the students are taught about the process, how it works, and they participate in programs. And, of course, they can get course credit for charitable work, for community work, volunteer work. But it does address that our public school students wouldn't become commodities for campaigns. Of course, they can volunteer, subject to their parents' wishes, depending on their age. But as far as them being coerced or compelled or course credit, that's what's addressed here.
And I'm referring to internships at the Capitol, internships in our district offices. One of the most common responses that we hear from legislators to youth that come to testify here at the Capitol is the celebration of their civic and their political engagement, and we encourage that. And so my question is, why is there in this bill before us, it not only discourages this, but goes against existing TEKs that require civics education?
Well, Senator, I'm glad you asked, and I want to make sure I answered your question properly. What is the issue about a student being coerced or forced to give a course credit? It's about lobbying. It's about political activism, efforts to persuade legislative executive branch. Nothing in here goes to an internship like you're describing. This is about advocacy, campaign, political activity. Nothing in here would limit a student's ability to receive course credit for an internship with a government office.
Okay, so the bill, you're saying that the bill does not state that a student may not gain a grade or course credit for their work, their affiliation, or serving or service learning with an organization involved in advocacy or lobbying?
I thought you were talking about an internship with the government. Did I misunderstand you?
I was, yes. Now I'm moving on to an organization.
Okay. Yes, sir. It does prevent political activism for course credit, so a student's not pressured or compelled to do that.
Well, I've got school districts back home in El Paso. El Paso High School offers several courses that allow students to gain credit for participating in an internship or conducting research on real-world problems under the guidance of a mentor or a professional community. And some of the places that they go to homeless shelters, they do child crisis center, they go to the family violence center, and these courses give students practical application, of previously studied knowledge on the issues and the organizations that they're working with, the skills that gives them the freedom to pursue academic passions. So, would this bill preclude students from, particularly in my district, in your district, from receiving credit for interning or conducting research projects for local organizations such as the Advocacy Center of El Paso for Children or the Drowning Prevention Coalition of El Paso?
Well, Senator, a group like a child advocacy center helping those children who've been abused and had those kind of challenges, that wouldn't be affected here. As I read this, it's pretty clearly talking about political activism, social policy advocacy, public policy advocacy. It's more a political element. I think that's what's implicated here.
Okay, because in 2013, I want to give an example. A class of first graders came from Georgetown, and they came to the Capitol. They lobbied for the pecan pie to become the state pie of Texas. This legislation would not prohibit such assignments, correct?
Well, let me read it carefully. I didn't think about the pecan pie lobby, so give me a minute. I thought the dean was saying something about that. I'm sorry. You got me there. I don't know. I have to ask the lawyers about that one. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I don't think that's the idea.
Okay. So my question on that, on the lobbying, how does this bill define being engaged in lobbying or social or public policy advocacy?
Okay, so work for, affiliation with, or service, learning, and association with an organization engaged in lobbying for legislation at the federal, state, or local level, or social policy advocacy or public policy advocacy, political activism, lobbying, or efforts to persuade members of the legislature or executive branch at the federal, state, or local level to take specific actions by direct communication or participation in a practice or similar activity involving social policy advocacy or public policy advocacy. So those are, I think I read that right. So those are the specific descriptions. So we're not talking about service projects or Meals on Wheels or community gardens or helping the homeless or helping children who've been abused. But if it goes into that political end of trying to affect policy in that way, that would be implicated. And of course, students can do it, but they couldn't be compelled to do it or of course credit for it.
Okay. I want to transition a little bit. I want to go back to a point that Senator Menendez brought up. It's on page 5 on item number 2, where it says, a teacher who chooses to discuss a topic described by subdivision 1 shall do the best of the teacher's ability, strive to explore that topic from diverse and contending perspectives without giving deference to any one perspective. In El Paso, a white supremacist drove to our community and massacred 23 Latinos. This is one of the largest massacres of the Latino community in U.S. history. Can you explain to me how a teacher in El Paso is supposed, in this instance, where a white supremacist who posted a racist manifesto online, how is an El Paso teacher supposed to strive, in this instance, to explore that topic from a diverse and contending perspective without giving any deference to any perspective? Can you walk me through that?
I'll do my best, Senator. And we've discussed this before. That was affecting for all of us, but most of us aren't from El Paso, so we don't know what that was like. We cannot imagine. But I suspect that in the community, different groups and different people were affected in different ways, all of them bad. But I would suspect the families of the victims will be affected one way. Folks, forgive me, folks who were physically wounded and recovered from their wounds might be affected differently. Their friends, their family, other folks in the community, other minority groups, other ethnic groups that were not specifically targeted were also, I'm sure, concerned and upset. There are multiple perspectives that all need to be considered. That's the idea. You notice nothing here talks about moral equivalence of bad acts. No one is suggesting that.
So would the teacher, in an effort to strive to explore that topic from a diverse and contending perspective without giving deference, how is the teacher to do that?
Forgive me. That's what I thought I was talking about, reflecting that different people in the community would have had a different experience, all of them bad. but different folks affected in different ways. And so exploring those things, discussing all those things, leading the students through a discussion, I can't imagine how hard that would be, but if a teacher chose to the best of their ability, they'd fully explore it and go through that with the students. I mean, that's how I read it. Am I answering your question?
Yeah, so the question is not to give deference or the perspective of the individual who did the shooting and the shooter's beliefs.
I think that might even go to what Senator Eckhart and I were discussing about implicit bias, because it does say to the best of the teacher's ability. You know, each one of us has a perspective, and we express ideas through that lens and through our experience and what we've been through. And so we want to share that. We also want to help students explore other perspectives. Is that what you're talking about?
I think we got it. Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it.
And then the transcript of the first Lincoln-Douglas debate, 1858. Why that first debate?
Senator, that's interesting. They tell us that that was one of, if not the first debates that was a media event. In the past, those matters were held more in private. Of course, back then, members of the U.S. Senate were selected by the state legislatures, right? And so Lincoln and Douglas were competing for that U.S. Senate seat to be chosen by the Illinois legislature. And so they had these debates all around the state. In fact, they had one in each congressional district, and the media covered them and wrote about them. And you know, they talked about slavery. Again, I'm so glad you brought that up, because this bill is about painting American history, Texas history, warts and all, about learning from our mistakes, from our horrible mistakes, from horrible experiences. Slavery, that was the fundamental question in those Lincoln.
Senator Hughes, I'm not going to be repetitive. A lot of questions have been answered, but I need to speak to the different articles or different documents you think should be common to everyone. And I don't differ with you on that. But there were documents that were chosen not by Hispanics, not by African Americans in this body, but by Anglos. No input from us in terms of what founding documents should in fact be considered by all children in the state. I agree with you on an individual basis, something that was learned and taught way back before the Civil War. As Senator Betancourt just mentioned, in 1858, here's the problem. There are words in many instances that are hollow. Would you not agree with that?
Oh, Senator, that's right. In fact, Lincoln said that. He said we're hypocrites. We talk about the Declaration of Independence, but we have slavery. Oh, you're right. That's what he was talking about.
The genesis of what happened in Carroll ISD, because I'm a lawyer on that case, okay, is there were African American, Hispanic, Asian parents that went to the school district that has no African Americans or minorities on that board, much like what's been going on in this entire country. Do you know that as it relates to African American representation in this state, that after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, after the 15th Amendment in 1870 was adopted, there were 3 African Americans members in the state Senate. How many are in here today? 2. That there were 54 or so House members that were African American. How many are over there now? 16. But we don't want to talk about that. We want to hide that. We don't want teachers to talk about what happened back when and how it applies today. I agree with you that a person shouldn't be judged by the color of their skin. But unfortunately, that's the plight today of African Americans and Latinos and minorities in this country. And let's not whitewash it, because it is. And yes, we should be teaching our children the history of this country so they won't make the same mistakes that have been made by our generations and generations before us. And when we put up instances like this right here, Mr. President, I think that we do a disservice. This is my opinion. We do a disservice to Texas. And why do we do a disservice? Let's talk about it. When you look at some of the things that are in this bill, we put our educators right in the crosshairs of complaints that can be lodged against them. We put our educators in a situation to allow the State Board of Education, school districts, to put in place sanctions if they run afoul of this particular bill. How does an educator make a determination as to whether or not they have provided that diverse perspective as it relates to a current issue? Whether they've provided the right one? And what the impact would be if they didn't, if they get a complaint that a parent says if they didn't provide this particular perspective. Why do we want to do that? Why do we want to stomp on educational freedom of teachers? You posed a book that Senator Johnson says is not reflective of Highland Park. You state some other school districts and things. As I said in Carroll ISD, those parents, Senator, and I better ask the question this way. You would agree with me that parents shouldn't have to be worried about their children being called all types of derogatory names. You would agree with that, wouldn't you?
Of course.
But that was happening in Carroll ISD. It was on social media. The parents go to the school district and said, how can we solve this problem? The school district that was obviously not reelected said, we're going to set up a community task force to look at issues and determine exactly what should happen, and you need to bring back the recommendations. I won't go into all of the details, but let me assure you that school district right now is being investigated by the civil rights, by the federal government, I'll put it that way, because of the issues that are going on in that district as it relates to protecting our children. Senator, what is white supremacy? What is that?
The white supremacy, as I understand it, is the view that one race that particular race is superior to other races.
Does that exist today?
Many people believe that. Many people believe that. Of course, they're wrong, but many people believe that.
Well, let me tell you where they're right, okay? And out of all due respect to my colleagues here, I know this is a family, but when you don't have African Americans or Latinos, Latinx persons elected in this body for 60 or 70 years, that tells you that it still exists. When you have a Texas A&M and a Prairie View that in 1862, land-grant colleges in the United States, A&M was one, and it wasn't until 1890, guess what? That was during the period of Reconstruction that Prairie View was developed. And guess what? Prairie View has never had the resources necessary at all. You look at Texas Southern. The lawsuit, Sweat versus Painter. But we don't want to teach about that and make sure it applies to what's going on currently? No, I don't want to sit up and say,
of course,
Senator Nichols or your son or daughter that you're responsible for it. We shouldn't do that. But by the same token, when we have racism, how do you define racism?
Senator, I would define racism as judging someone by the color of their skin and not by the content of their character.
And African Americans and Hispanics continue to be judged by the color of their skin.
Oh, Senator,
you would agree with that, wouldn't you?
Senator, it happens. Of course it happens. It's never okay.
It happens right here in Texas, right?
Of course it does. And this bill talks about that with the teaching that one race is superior to another or one sex is superior to another. That can't be taught. That's specifically forbidden because, as you know, some of these materials teach that's the case, and we know it's not true. We know it's not true.
Senator,
we know it's not true.
Let's not sit up and say that particular book should be the basis of us passing this right here. I mean, if that's going to be your argument, then so be it. It is, okay? I'll defer to you how you make your argument.
I was asked to provide examples. I would hope
that you look at the totality of the circumstances that we find ourselves in. If the Republicans are going to vote for this, it's going to be it's going to be a partisan vote, like many other the votes we've taken in here. Then so be it. It is, but it's wrong. We put teachers in the crosshairs where they have to figure out exactly what perspectives need to be advanced when they talk about current issues. You say they can't be compelled. Now, let me ask you this.
Well, the bill says they can't be compelled. That's not what I said.
Right, I'm going to that right now. If a teacher has a contract with a school district to be a social studies teacher, and as part of the curriculum, the need that the school district want them to teach is about current events, they can refuse to do that based on this particular bill, or what?
Senator, I'm confused. A few moments ago, you were concerned about teachers being forced by the district or forced by the state to teach certain things or not. And now it sounds like you're suggesting that they should be. Help me understand.
Let me be more specific. Maybe I was not coherent on that. If a teacher has a contract to teach social studies, you with me so far?
So far.
Okay. And as part of that, the teacher has to teach current events. You with me so far?
So far, yes, sir.
Okay. You have language in here, specifically on page 5.
Top of page 5, yes, sir.
Page 5, line 2. A teacher may not be compelled. So if a teacher has a contract, based on that contract, is the teacher duty bound or contractually bound to teach current events if indeed that's what his or her contract calls for?
Well, remember the bill says that we are asking the SBOE to develop new I'm answering your question, to develop new TEKS for social studies. So the social studies TEKS would be consistent with this bill. So a teacher would not be asked to do something this bill says not to do. That, if we look at the totality of what the bill says, develop new TEKS, and we're going to teach those in social studies.
So then, if indeed there are revised TEKS that say that you need to teach current events, and the teacher says no, but they have a term contract or a contract, can they point to this compelled language to say that they are not going to do it and not be in breach of contract?
Well, Senator, it says a teacher may not be compelled to discuss a particular current event.
That's what I'm saying.
What? So, Senator,
that's exactly.
Senator, current events, the teacher has discretion to teach current events. It says they cannot be compelled to teach a particular current event.
And again,
we understand the difference between those.
My question is, if they're required by their contracts and the TEKS to do that, as an example, the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January the 6th. Okay, if that's part of the TEKS, that they need to talk about the Capitol and how it's been attacked throughout history, up to recent times, and they decide they don't want to do that, would they be in breach of contract?
Well, if that's part of the TEKS, that would be their job, and of course,
they would be in breach of contract.
That would no longer be a particular current event. That would be in the past. It happened.
Well, if it happens again, okay, heaven forsake it doesn't. But if it happens, and it's a current event, and they're required to teach it, and they decide not to, are they in breach of contract, or can they rely on this language in this particular bill if it becomes law?
Senator, this speaks to a particular current event.
That's what I'm talking about.
Not the teaching of current events broadly.
I'm talking about a particular current event.
The State Board of Education, elected by the people, and the TEA are developing the TEKS. If this bill passes, Senator, consistent with the bill.
All due respect, you said that before. Okay, all due respect. And I'm asking you a particular question.
That's still my answer.
So you can't answer the question. So then let me make sure I understand. What you are not answering is, again, another situation where school districts may very well be in a situation. If they want a particular current event taught by their social studies teachers that align with the TEKS, you're now telling the school districts they may be on shaky ground if a teacher says no, and you can't compel me to teach that particular current event, correct?
And if we read this bill, it's a particular current event or widely debated and currently controversial issue of public policy or social affairs. So this is talking about those charged matters.
You're just not going to answer the question, right?
Well, Senator, I'm reading every word in the bill and not pulling two words out of context.
Well, okay, well, then
the context is important.
We've got all morning to do this, okay?
I'm right here. Come on.
So a teacher may not be compelled to discuss a particular current event, right? Disjunctively or widely debated and currently controversial issue of public policy or social affairs. Is that what it says?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
that's what it says.
We agree on what it says.
That's how I read it. Yes, sir.
And the point I'm making is this. If indeed a school district wants that teacher to teach a particular current event or a widely debated and currently controversial issue of public policy pursuant to their obligation in their contract, and it's aligned with the TEKS, can they be terminated if they decide not to, or will they be able to rely on your language in here, compelled?
Senator, the TEKS are going to be new after this bill, and the TEKS will be consistent with the bill. So you set up a hypothetical that is not reality.
It's not reality.
No, sir.
It is reality, sir.
No, sir.
Okay, well, if that's what you want to say, fine. But you know as well as I, it is reality, and it's going to happen. And when it happens, I hope that both of us are in this body, and you can take a look at it and say, we've had this particular debate because we're going to make certain that this is memorialized in the journal. But I assure you that you're putting school districts and teachers in the crosshairs of this particular bill.
So this bill protects teachers from being put in those situations. But
I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry.
The bill is protecting teachers from being put in those situations you're describing. But I understand. Go ahead. Sounds like we differ over that.
You put them in terms of this compel language. You hadn't answered the question. What does compel mean? Let me answer it another way. Let me think about how I'm going to ask it. If indeed there's a contract and the teacher decides not to perform pursuant to the contract, saying that they can't be compelled pursuant to this particular language, can they be terminated?
If this bill passes, it will be the law of the land in Texas, and it would control these matters. And again, the TEKS will be developed, and you've read the bill. The TEKS will be developed according to what's in this contract.
Sure. Again, we're going back to TEKS, and I'm just assuming that.
But that's what our teachers teach.
The point I'm making is this, though, sir. If they breach their contract, would they breach their contract if they decide not to perform?
Senator, under this bill, the protection is given to the teachers, so they cannot be compelled to do that.
All right,
I want to make sure I'm clear on that.
I think you finally answered the question. What I heard you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that even if a teacher has a contract and the teachers have been realigned as it relates to social study and the curriculum.
Yes, sir.
And they have to teach a particular current event, they can't be compelled to do so, correct?
May not be compelled. I agree.
All right, members, you just heard what he said. They cannot be compelled, even if they have a contract that tells them otherwise.
Contract would not be inconsistent with the TEKS or with state law.
Sir, let me ask you this. Help me to understand this is on page 5 of the proposed amendment that I'm talking about. I just don't understand it. Down at the bottom of page 5, start on line 24, a teacher, administrator, or other employee of a state agency. We haven't talked about state agencies tonight, but we will. School district, open enrollment charter school may not require or make part of a course concepts that serve to inculcate.
Yes, sir.
What does that mean?
Inculcate, it means to indoctrinate, to force an idea. I had to look it up too. You probably knew what it meant, but the idea is indoctrinate, to present these principles, to teach these principles.
So the principles that you're talking about are the ones in H3, right?
Well, let's start on line 5 of page 6. Yes, sir.
Okay, so I've heard the conversation and the questions that you've been asked, is it my understanding that this bill does not prevent teachers from talking about issues concerning slavery?
That is correct. It does not. Of course not.
Let me ask you this question. If you have an individual that is, I guess, an extinct organization, let's just say an individual that's the Grand Master of the Klan, and the teacher wants to hold that person up as an individual that's a racist.
Yes.
Are they able to do that under this bill?
Of course.
Okay,
Yes, sir. No,
I
I'm
want
with
to make
you.
certain that all of this is in the record.
I'm with you. No, I won't.
Have an organization that is known as a hate organization. Are they able to talk about that organization?
Absolutely.
And individuals that are members of that organization?
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
In
No,
instances,
I'm glad we can talk through these. This is important. Please keep going. This is important. I want to make sure we get this
I'm
right.
glad you deem this important. I really.
Well, of course. We agree on these things. We agree on these things.
Good. Okay. Let me ask you this. Why is it in H5, well, first of all, you say that organizations, one second, let me go back. On page 5, line 9, a school district open enrollment charter or teacher may not make part of a course, award a grade or course credit, including extra credit for the things that you list in A, B, and C, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, but then you go to page 7, line 12, talking about charitable projects as community gardens, volunteering at local food banks, other service projects, they can get credit.
Yes, sir. That's right.
You don't find that inconsistent, sir?
Oh,
and
no,
I think
sir.
you and Senator Blanco had this conversation.
No, thank you. We did, and I'm glad you pointed out because I couldn't find that section when he and I were talking. So the distinction is between political activism, issue advocacy, that sort of thing. Of course, students can do those things. Nothing forbids them. We want to make sure they're not being compelled or coerced or offered course credit. They're being used in political campaigns. That's the idea. They can do it if they want to, but it says they won't be compelled to do it, coerced, offered course credit. Now, but again, community service projects, charitable things like that, of course, the course credit for those wouldn't be affected.
You would agree with me that some students right now in high school are getting credit for being involved in political activities within their community.
Yes, I've heard that. Yes, sir, I believe you.
And now, just like you've heard about all of this other stuff.
What other stuff?
In terms of these books and all of that, you have heard that students in high school who are in student government, student council, who want to be elected officials,
when that's the student government,
that they are involved in right now in different types of community projects where they're working at the city, at someone's senatorial office.
Student government.
Let me finish.
Okay.
And they're getting credit.
Yes, sir.
And now you want to take away the ability of these young people that will ultimately replace us in this body to get course credit.
No, sir.
Isn't that what this does?
That's not what it says. That's not what it says. Student government's not affected by this. Working in the office not affected by this. This is about political issue advocacy. That's pretty clear in that language.
And so they can't come to the Capitol and be advocates for student rights and get credit, correct?
Not get course credit if they're lobbying for legislation.
What's the difference between lobbying and advocating?
Oh, I think it will be the same thing, but in the legislative context, sometimes people talk about lobbying.
Again, Senator Nelson's grandchildren won't be able to come down there if they want to lobby for women's rights.
They can come. They're welcome to come.
They can't get course credit, though.
Can't get course credit if they're lobbying for legislation.
If this bill passes. But right now, they could.
If they're lobbying for legislation.
They can get that credit right now, though, if a teacher decides to give it to them, correct?
Depending on the school and the teacher. There's nothing in state.
That credit right now, but we're taking away that ability to do that.
I'm trying to answer your question, Senator. Nothing in state law that I'm aware of prevents it now.
That's what I'm saying. But you're taking away the ability for teachers to have the discretion, Senator, Just like you take away the ability for teachers to have the discretion, Senator, right now, under your bill, to deal with current issues in a manner that they seem fit, without the chilling effects of being punished because they hadn't put in the right perspectives.
Senator, I thought you wanted the school to be able to make him do it. Are you concerned?
Senator, what I'm saying to you is that you're taking away the discretion of teachers to give course credit for young students, many probably in here, that were in high school that did some of these things, for course credit. You're taking away that discretion right now as a result of this particular bill, and it's a part of
Or political activism.
political activism.
Yes.
Why do you think all these people, you can't sit up and tell me, Senator, that you weren't involved in politics as a young person? You were. I know you were. Most people around here were.
And nobody is saying that they couldn't be or shouldn't be. It's just about being compelled or coerced or given course credit for certain activities.
No one's been, I'm not saying being compelled.
I beg your pardon?
I'm not saying being compelled. If a teacher decides that exercising their discretion and assuming that they have the permission of the principal, et cetera, they should be able to give course credit, Senator.
No, the bill says compelled. You didn't say that. I was just talking about what's in the bill.
Well, I'm saying, but you're taking away the discretion, right? This bill takes away the discretion from a teacher or a school district or a charter to give course credit for the activities that you name here in the bill, correct?
Under every bill that we pass that prescribes activity,
So
limits discretion to some extent.
You do agree that it prescribes activities that heretofore have not been prescribed?
Oh, yes, sir. Oh, yes, sir, of course.
Would you object to an amendment when we get to that point, if we get to that point, that would include Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail as a part of something that can be taught as a founding principle of this country?
Senator, I'd sure like to look at the amendment. I've read that, and I'm a fan, and those are the kind of concepts that this bill talks about. So can we talk about it when we get there? But it certainly sounds consistent to me. Now, I will say this. You notice that the elements listed here are from that time period we talked about. I guess the newest one is that 1858 Lincoln-Douglas debate. We talked about Frederick Douglass. These are about the founding documents, the Declaration, the Constitution, Federalist Papers, the other founding documents. So in fairness, the list here is about those basic documents from which Dr. King's teachings grew, and Frederick Douglass's and yours and others. So to be clear, it does talk about those founding documents in particular, but can we have that discussion? Is that okay when we get there?
Would you agree that as part of the founding documents, because this experiment in democracy, my friend, is still very, very young.
I know.
Okay?
I know.
And so the formation of the founding documents has frankly has not been established yet. Okay? I understand about the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, things like that, but the reality is that there are other documents that we should make certain are part of the discussion. Let me give you a few. What about the Brown versus Board of Education? Do you think that students in this country should know about that as part of the founding documents?
Of course. Well,
kind of ban, you know all of the issues associated with that, don't you? Brown versus Board of Education. The fact of the matter is, I believe.
You want me to answer?
I'm about to.
Am I going to answer, or are you going to answer for me?
Yes, without question.
Excuse me, members. Excuse me. And this is a wonderful debate between the two of you, but please try not to talk over each other. If you ask a question, or Bryan, if you ask a question, let him answer, and vice versa. Thank you. Okay, so we can hear you clearly.
Okay, thank you. Sure, Mr. President. In fact, when this bill was passed out of your committee, it was the anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education. Were you aware of that?
I know the year. I know 1954. I did not know the day.
I believe it was the day.
I believe you. I don't doubt you.
Okay, so do you think that students need to know about the Brown versus Board of Education as the founding documents?
Senator, it's in the TEKS. It belongs in the TEKS. It's not a founding document, but yes, they need to learn about it. Of course, it belongs in the TEKS. Yes, we're for that.
Do you think students should know about the Emancipation Proclamation?
Yes, sir.
Do you think that students should know that the U.S. Supreme Court of the Ninth Circuit, U.S. Supreme Court decision in Menendez versus Westminster, a case that was cited 7 years before Brown versus Board of Education, held that school desegregation was unconstitutional? You think that students need to know about that, especially in Texas, given our growing Hispanic population? They need to know this history. All of us need to know.
Sir.
Would you
And
not
these-
agree?
These elements need to be taught, and as you know, the way this bill is written, those founding documents are listed, and then the state, Senator, let me answer, State Board of Education and TEA are asked to develop TEKS to put these elements in, and so, of course, that's relevant. Those, I believe everything we've discussed is currently in the TEKS and needs to be in the TEKS. I agree.
So why do we need this bill if everything's already in the TEKS?
Well, sir, Senator, everything you and I have discussed, I believe, is in the TEKS already.
Constitution is too, sir.
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So why do we need
Well,
this thing?
because unfortunately we do have curriculum that you and I do not agree with, but we do have teaching now that we want to get out that says that one race or sex is inherently superior to another, or that an individual, by virtue of the individual's race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. Now you and I have discussed these things. You and I don't believe that. I think we agree we don't want that taught in schools.
Well,
That's why we need this bill. Respectfully, respectfully, that's why we need this bill.
I'm going to let you finish. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I'm done. Thank you, Senator.
Sure. Okay. All right.
You go ahead.
All right. Now, who has made the decision that those are the only documents that we should put in this bill?
Well, in this stage in the process, the members of the Senate will make the decision, and if we pass it, it goes over to the House, but you know that process. Now, to say this was Senator Creighton's bill. I know teachers and professors and parents worked on this, and I don't know every person who was involved, but I do know that makes sense, and they're good things. I think we can all agree that the things on this list need to be there.
And you said teachers worked on this?
Well, yes, sir.
You heard Senator Alvarado talk about that 100 or so educators in this state that said this is not a good step towards education. You heard her ask you those questions, right?
Like we've discussed, there are differing opinions
and you heard about
in a
the
pluralistic
11,000
society like we have, and
11,000 people that have contacted offices about this being a bad step for education in the state.
About Senator, I believe her. Yes, sir.
Okay,
she said she's got those emails. I'm sure that's right.
All right, so sir,
I got a bunch of emails
again
who liked the bill.
The decision, once again, in this state, as opposed to Democrats and Republicans coming together. It is ironic. It was Republicans that had the back of African Americans doing Reconstruction. But it's the Republicans now that are not listening to us at all about these types of issues. Not about all issues, but about these types of issues. And what I'm saying to you, my friend, my colleagues, is that there should be other documents that should be required, that we make certain that there are TEKS associated with them so they can be taught as part of the curriculum. And they align with exactly what you and I believe, that an individual shouldn't be judged by the color of their skin.
I know you believe that. I know that.
And so I'm asking you to kind of look at some of these other documents to see, can we put in this particular bill in order to get the TEKS to achieve the objective for which you say this bill is proposed?
Senator, may I ask, can we keep having this discussion? When we get there, can we sort through and see what we need to put in legislative intent and put on the record for the TEKS and what needs to go in here? Let's have that. Let's all of us have that discussion. That's my request.
Okay, very good. I'll take your word on that. Senator, but again, in closing, right now, I think this is the wrong step. I think this is the right step going in the wrong direction now, okay? As opposed to making certain that we sit down, cuss and discuss this to make certain that what happened in the past doesn't continue to happen in the future. I gave you an example of how it continues to happen right now. When you look at issues concerning criminal justice, Senator Whitmire, Health and Human Services, Senator Cole, of course. Poverty, housing, all of those issues continue to persist.
Yes, sir.
And even after, during the Reconstruction, African Americans in, I think it was Georgia, some 4,000 acres was set aside for them to make it on their own, as opposed to during the Emancipation Proclamation being here in Texas, General Granger coming to Texas saying, you're free. Free to do what? What in the hell are we going to do? You don't have land. You don't have boots. You don't have clothes. What are you going to do? And as a result of that history, we find Confederate sympathizers in our chamber. That African Americans have to stand here and deal with. And we're under, Senator, you've got to understand the Articles of Succession, which Senator Creighton and I, as part of our debate, talked about last time, when here in this chamber, people, not you, or anyone else in here, basically said what about African Americans?
Senator, I have read that document. It's heartbreaking. I've read it. I've read it.
And unfortunately, we still hadn't heeded the words of Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King, the urgency of noun, of us working together to get things done. Let us have input into your decision-making process. That's all I'm asking. Input into your decision-making process before we go down this road and prescribe what you think is the best option for students in the state of Texas. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator. And as I respectfully respond, criminal justice, housing, poverty, yes, it's all got to be taught. Yes, sir, all of it. Thank you, as we work through this process together. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, gentlemen, for the debate. Senator Miles, for what purpose?
Questions to my dear friend, Senator Hughes.
Do you yield?
Of course, I yield to my friend and my classmate.
I agree with you, Mr. President. That was an excellent debate. It's going into the morning, so I'm not going to be long, Brian. But I think it was Smokey Robinson who made a song, and it went like, here we go again. Here we go again. Let's break down this bill first. The bill provides that each district or open enrollment charter have at least one individual who takes a civic training program. Why doesn't it provide guidelines for that program?
Well, Senator, that's a great question. And we delegate that to the State Board of Education and to the Texas Education Agency to develop the details. So and again, as we discuss it, whatever we decide to do, but we give them some broad concepts, and then we ask them to develop the TEKS and to develop the training for it.
So we're going to put the bill in place, and we're going to let them go from there. Is that pretty much correct?
Yes, sir. I mean, that's the idea. It hasn't been passed, but that's the idea.
So does the bill have a fiscal note?
I beg your pardon?
Does the bill have a fiscal note?
No, sir, it doesn't. This is out into the future because at the end it talks about with the implementation, it takes them a while to develop these new TEKS, and so it doesn't affect this budget. There are some costs to it. For example, when the teachers come to get this training, they get a stipend, and that's taken care of by the state, not by their local district. So it doesn't have a fiscal note because it takes effect beyond the cycle, but there will be a cost to it.
So eventually it's going to have a fiscal note?
Oh, yes, sir. It's going to cost some.
I'm glad you
yes, sir.
made that clear. The bill doesn't say it, but basically it bans teachers from teaching institutional racism. How are we going to break down the barrier between the races if we don't teach our kids? Because I was always taught, where I went to school, that knowledge is power.
Senator,
and with knowledge, you can fix anything. With power, you can fix anything. So if we can't talk about it, how are we going to fix it?
Well, Senator, we can talk about it. We need to talk about it. And institutional racism, as I understand it, it reflects that there are advantages built into the system for some groups that other groups don't have. Now, I hope we agree that we're not there, but those barriers have been broken down over time. Not all of them. We've got a ways to go.
Well, I think we can all agree on that.
Yes, sir. But we're making progress. We're not there. But to be precise, there are specific things in the bill. It just talks about that we wouldn't want to teach that one race or sex is inherently superior to another, or that an individual, by virtue of the individual's race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. We don't teach that an individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely or partly because of the individual's race or sex. So and things you and I agree with. We agree with these things.
You're not going to get any argument out of me.
I know.
On what you just said.
I know that. I know.
But what you are going to get is it's time to tell the truth and teach our kids what really took place.
Yes, sir. And this is not about.
You need to stop living a lie, Bryan.
So we need to teach our history, warts and all of it.
With that being said, you started this conversation, this whole debate, with the book, Not My Idea, written by Anastasia Higginbotham. Did you read this book completely? Did you read it yourself, not your staff? Did you read it?
Oh, no, sir. Well, I've read about 10 or 12 pages, and I skimmed through it. I did not read it word for word. I've skimmed through it, and I've read the pages that are tabbed.
Do you know that Miss Higginbotham was a white woman?
Did I know she was what?
A white woman?
I did not know that. The name, it's her. I did not know that.
Okay. Do you know the purpose of the book? Why she wrote it?
Essentially, I'm not trying to be ugly. The title is Not My Idea, a book about whiteness. But that's all. I haven't read anything about the book. Just what's in the book.
Well,
I'll take your word for it.
Let me give you and read to you why she wrote it.
All right.
Okay. And this is probably why it wound up in Highland Park, because the Highland Park that I know, I haven't been there much. I don't think I've ever been inside a house in Highland Park. But the Highland Park I know is a very well-heeled community. Would you agree?
Yes, sir. It's very nice.
And
it's nice area.
And the community, is that over there? Senator, that you referred to as well is a very high-heeled community. Am I right, Senator West?
Yeah, South Lake's pretty nice. Yes.
Yeah. So the purpose of the book, and I'm quoting the author, Not My Idea, a book about whiteness, tackling white supremacy. So a white woman, Mr. President, was writing a book to teach white children how to break down and rid ourselves of white supremacy. She goes even further in the book and she states, helping young white people dismantle white supremacy is urgently needed in America. And the time is prime time to begin now. That's the purpose of the book. The purpose of the book was to teach white children how to dismantle white supremacy that you've already admitted that we exist right now today, earlier in your conversation with Senator West. Did you not?
He asked if people have that belief, and yes, it's sad. People do. There are people that do.
I think we're at the worst time
People
in
from
history.
many races believe they're superior to other people.
The racial divide is at the worst time in history right now as we stand here. And it's going to be left to us and our children, Senator West, to turn things around, Mr. President. And what she was doing with this book was putting it in white, well-heeled communities so she can teach those children so the cycle could be broken. One last thing I have to note in this book, a smooth, loving on-ramp for white families engaging in the discussion of race. That's what this book was all about. And that was the purpose of this book. I said it earlier, and I know I raised some hair on the back of some necks when I said, we've got to stop living a lie. You know, you've heard me speak of my grandmother before. We called her Big Mama.
Big Mama, yes, sir.
Big Mama used to always say, boy, the truth will set you free. And I think part of the problem that we're facing right now is that we keep wanting to kick the issues kicking the can down the road. And we don't really want to address them. Because it's ugly. Our past is ugly. You admitted it.
Oh, Senator, there's
but
no
in order for us
question
to change it,
no question about it.
In order for us to change it, we've got to take the step. And it's not going to be easy. Hard facts are going to have to be known. The truth is going to have to be told. And speaking of the truth, you know, the bill has several documents that are about to be can be taught, and it lists them, but it doesn't list Senator Betancourt. It doesn't list the second Lincoln-Douglas debate. It excludes it. But the first one is in there. And you brought this up, brother, and it seems like every time I'm debating anybody, it always comes down to me and you. I don't know why that is. Everybody see the pattern? So, help me out here, Senator Betancourt and Senator Hughes. Are we able to just pick and choose and tell only which stories in history we want to tell? Because the second Lincoln-Douglas debate ain't as rosy as the first one, Royce. It's just not that rosy, as you described, Brother Betancourt. So let's go over it just a little bit, since it was brought up. And since it's not in the bill for us to teach our children the real story, the facts, the truth. The second debate question to Brother Lincoln: I deserve to know whether Lincoln today stands as he did in 1854 in favor of the unconditional repeal of fugitive slave laws. Answer: I do not know, nor ever did stand in favor of unconditional repeal of fugitive slave laws. Complete reverse. That's the truth. That's history. Why can't we teach that? Second question. I deserve him to answer whether he stands pledged today, as he did in 1854, against the admission of any more slave states in the Union, even if the people want them. Answer: I do not know, nor ever did stand pledged against the admission of any more slave states in the Union. And it goes on, everything is in reverse. I can go on and on, all the way down to 8 questions, and all of them are in direct reverse, Senator Betancourt. And this is the second Lincoln-Douglas debate. And you knew that, but you failed to bring it up. You didn't know? Well, let me give it to you. Here it is right here. Okay? My point to this is, Bryan, we can't pick and choose, not just Bryan, Body. We can't just pick and choose, Mr. President, what we're going to teach as history and expect to change things and make things better. It doesn't work that way. And this bill is eliminating and excluding some things and including kind of what you want to say. And you take helpful tools like this and you turn them around. This book was written to teach kids how to dismantle white supremacy. Per the author. In order to fix something, we first have to address it, Brother Hughes. And I think what this bill does is going to limit our ability to capture this moment and to plant those seeds in our children. We're at the worst time in history with our racial divide. Instead of putting up road barriers and blockages, let's be free. Let's be free to love, to learn, and to fix things. And unfortunately, Brother Hughes, I view this bill as a tool to make sure we don't do that. And that's why I'm voting against the bill. Thank you, members, and thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. I'm always at a disadvantage when you or Senator West or any other senator, Republican or Democrat, says Mr. President, because I'm not able to answer under the tradition of the Senate. But I surely would. Senator Taylor, for what purpose?
If I could ask the author a couple questions.
Do you yield?
Yeah, of course I'll yield.
Senator Hughes, looking at your bill, we've had some discussion about these particular documents, but your bill starts off with, in adopting the essential knowledge and skills for the social studies curriculum, the State Board of Education shall adopt essential knowledge and skills that develop each student's civic knowledge. Do you understand how our State Board of Education adopts TEKS? Are you aware of that process?
Well, Senator, I don't have a lot of detail. I know those folks are elected. I know they get input from parents and teachers, but I wish you'd tell me how it works.
Well, they pull together large committees from across the state, generally very diverse group of people, and they come together. We just went through this for the Mexican-American studies and some other things in the past. So it's a large group of people. It's not just the State Board of Education that puts these together. And so they bring in a lot of people with input, and then the State Board does vote on the recommendations from those committees. So it's a big process. So when I read these things that are listed here, this is not supposed to be all-inclusive, is it not? Or I read the word including, I don't see only these things.
Senator, that's
so it's
right.
really
That's
the foundation of what the State Board of Education should start with. And then with some of these other documents that have been brought up, that would be part of that committee process that they go through when they're establishing these new TEKS. So this is not meant to be listing everything that's going to be brought into this process. And I'm sure the SBOE would appreciate input from people all over the state to help pull this together. The point of this is to make sure our history is rich and full and has the documents from contemporary times, but not just these documents, but other documents as well. Would you not agree?
Senator, that's exactly right. It says including, and it lists these foundational documents, but it's sure not an exhaustive list. That's clear in the statute. Thank you for that.
One of the things I have observed in my short time here in the legislature, here in my second term, is for every bill, there is a reason. And I'm sure there are different kinds of reasons, but the most common reason I see is something bad happened. Something went wrong. And sadly, it's come to our attention that in the same way that there are those who do espouse these kinds of ideas, which I stand here, like all of you I know, and condemn, that there are also those who hold positions of authority as teachers that have been teaching these kinds of ideas to our kids. And even if it's one person, it is one too many. One teacher. How many students do you suppose one teacher impacts?
Over a career, my goodness, hundreds. And even in a given school year, we're talking about dozens or scores. That's right.
I just want to say, I don't think there's anyone in this chamber who would want their children or grandchildren or anyone they know to be taught these ideas, especially when they go to school. And I want to thank you for the care. I'm sure there are other offensive ideas we could add to this list. This is probably not an exhaustive list, just like the first part of this bill is probably not an exhaustive list of the truth about our past that also needs to be taught.
That's right.
But they're a good core. And I appreciate the thought that's gone into making a statement with specific ideas about things that are important for kids to know so they can be a good citizen, and things that no child should be taught. And in fact, the sorts of things that we ought to band together and really work to eradicate in our culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you.
Senator Whitmire, what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield?
You yield.
I'll yield, of course.
Senator Hughes, I've been patient tonight, and I assume, like you, have noticed the passion and emotion so many of our colleagues. Based on that emotion and passion, you see that perhaps your bill is flawed.
Senator, there's emotion and passion about issues our country is grappling with and issues we're dealing with, and we've discussed many of those things tonight as we need to. When we talk about a discussion of this bill, the heart of this bill is those matters Senator Paxton was just asking me about, that I hope we can all agree that we condemn. This teaching that one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex, that's offensive to all of us.
Well, let me ask you, and obviously you've heard me say, and I know you've been here long enough to know, there's not any piece of legislation that cannot be improved. Would you not agree?
That's correct. I agree with you.
So that leads me to, after the discussions we've heard, you could improve your bill or address the concerns of Senator West, Boris, Menendez, Paxton, Bentoncourt. I mean, could we not look at this as a starting point that I personally view as badly flawed? I mean, just the list of documents that are required to be covered in our lesson plans. Who came up with that list?
Well, Senator, the list was compiled with, this is Senator Creighton's bill, though I'm proud to, I'm proud to join him with it, but it was compiled by teachers and professors and parents. And of course, many of these elements are already in the TEKS. They're in the existing TEKS, but since we're asking for new ones, we're making sure that they have the foundational documents in there.
I understand, and that sounds great.
Well, it sounds great because it's true.
This late at night or in the morning, for you to just understand these are basic documents. Of course they are. But we left off some basic documents. So I think anyone that's listening and watching this debate, and before we vote, we should know the origin of this piece of legislation, because I think that is a fair question. It ought to be weighed. You know, I don't think it's a coincidence that the House and Senate sponsor are from the same area of the state, Montgomery County. Maybe I just sat here and reading too much into that, but it's a pretty narrow base of good folks. But you didn't come up with a list of the items that must be covered.
When I read through the list, it made sense to me.
Federalist Papers?
We made some changes to it today, but no, it was...
Essays 10 and 51?
Yes, sir.
Who chose those provisions?
Well, 10 is the one that talks about minority rights and majority rights in a pluralistic society, and 51 talks about separation of powers with the three branches. So
I know.
Pretty fundamental, and so that's why those were chosen.
But who chose that?
A group of teachers and professors.
Tell us who they are, what their backgrounds are,
No, sir, I don't know. Senator Creighton would know. I don't know the specific answer.
We're supposed to vote on something that's going to instruct the state school board to come up with lesson plans that provide for this, and you want us to just hear your voice that it's a group of people and educators.
Senator, the war zone...
Group of educators, diverse group of educators.
Senator,
had no input in it.
Senator, the words on the page speaks for themselves. I don't think we would take exception to the Declaration or the Constitution or the Federalist Papers.
But no one's got John F. Kennedy's inauguration speech on there.
Well, these are all from the founding.
I was coming up in a civics class.
Well, these are all from the founding era. And again, as Senator Taylor pointed out to us, this is not an exhaustive list. We asked the SBOE and the TEA to develop TEACs to include these foundational documents, the root from which we get Dr. King's speeches and President Kennedy's and President Reagan's and others, and yours and Senator West.
We honored Rosa Parks today.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That had been too many hours ago. I don't know any of this would cover her courage.
Well, Senator, this covers foundational.
She might be on my short list of the most courageous individuals ever.
I agree. This is about our founding documents, about those foundational ones. She's a wonderful expression and a wonderful example of an American hero, and we should honor her. And she needs to be in the TEACs. And let's put this on the record for legislative intent. But this is about those foundational documents.
I understand, but unfortunately, those foundation documents were written by landowners, white males, no women, no people of color. So it's great to recognize the foundation documents, but quite frankly, our history is being made as we stand here tonight.
And Senator,
would you not agree?
Senator, it's being made based on those classic liberal ideas of equality and liberty and expanding opportunity for everyone.
They weren't practicing it.
That Senator Lincoln said the same thing. That's why that debate is in there. We recognize that. This is about America living out the true meaning of its creed. You know that. I know we agree on this.
I understand that. But I'm just so disappointed that we spend so much time on something that, in quite frankly, would you not agree, is so limited in scope. I mean, for instance, if you were a civic teacher, wouldn't you like to use your life experiences and your educational training and your student teacher to design your classroom with the approval of your administration and your school board without having 31 senators at midnight try to tell you what you ought to cover to get the attention, the imagination, and help shape and mold future leaders?
We count on those teachers to use those gifts and to interact with those students. And as you know, in this bill, we're asking the State Board of Education, with all that stakeholder input that Senator Taylor talked about, we're directing the State Board to develop these TEACs that our teachers will be able to use. You know this is just part of the process. Come on.
The problem I'm having, and I'm trying to pull it out of you because I see you as such a fine person, and I know you inherited this bill, just, is it really going to accomplish the good that the sponsors were planning or the persons that brought them the idea? I think this is just the beginning, would you not agree?
Oh, yes, sir.
Of the design of the curriculum that this bill speaks to. And I think as soon as we get out of here and we go back to the school days in September and this begins to get implemented, would you not agree we're fixing to ignite the passion in the educational community that we saw demonstrated on this floor today?
Well, Senator, that's right.
I just think back to local control, school board elections, PTA, I can go on and on with people that are going to say, what were y'all thinking in Austin on a Friday night, thinking that you're smarter than the folks that are with the students each and every day. So I'm still bothered about where did this come from? And,
Senator,
and you really haven't told me yet.
Well, Senator, in this bill, we're directing the state board to develop these TEKs, and we're giving them the foundation of documents for it. And as you know, they're going to hear from teachers and parents and professors and stakeholders.
Yeah.
You know how that works. You've seen that before. They developed the Texas Essential Knowledge and
That
Skills.
works, and you know what? That's an excellent point. You know how it works. We got 31, 32 very unique experiences, and I'm surprised how we all turned out, quote, normal, and I'm being very generous, quote, normal, without a piece of legislation that told our teachers what to instruct us in. I mean, civics, social studies, government was my favorite subject, and I had very instrumental instruction that motivated me to want to be hungry about serving people in government. And I'm amazed that it worked out as well as it did.
And Senator, I know you were not taught that an individual's moral character is necessarily determined by the individual's race or sex. We all agree, I think that shouldn't be taught. And that's what this bill's about. So you.
Thank you. Senator Hughes. Senator Hughes, I know you believe in democracy, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you believe in the democratic process, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you have mentioned that this floor substitute that we're calling Amendment Number 1.
Yes, sir.
Had input. Is that correct? That it had input from several groups? You mentioned that it had input from teachers, I think you said.
Senator, that's right. And again, in the absence of the author, I'm at a disadvantage.
Okay.
But I understand that there were teachers, professors, scholars, smart people that worked on this.
But I guess my question is, you know, you had a hearing posted, a notice on May the 14th to hear committee substitute for this bill on Monday, May the 17th, correct?
Yes, sir. I'll take your word for the dates. That sounds right.
And then there was a new notice posted on Sunday, May the 16th, that removed committee substitute for 3979. Was that correct?
That's right. Senator Creighton was not recovering as quickly as he had hoped to. And so at his request, we removed that bill from the posting for that meeting.
But then on Monday, May the 17th, you suspended the rules at the end of session to hear committee substitute for 3917 that very afternoon. Is that not correct?
That's exactly right. Continued discussion with Senator Creighton in his office and concern about the lateness of the session. At his request, we put that bill back. We asked the Senate to suspend the rules to put that bill back on the agenda. So, yes, I agree with you.
My concern is this. This legislation, when it was heard in the House, had over 90 organizations testify against it. But when you removed it on Sunday from hearing, then no one prepared to be here on Monday when you suspended at the end of the day to have it heard. Does that not somehow circumvent the democratic process?
Senator, the intent was to accommodate the author and to deal with session deadlines, and that's all it is.
I just think we need to be very careful when we make comments that there has been input when, for whatever the reasons, when there was a suspension and then the bill was removed from posting and then it was suspended. You made suspension on the very afternoon that the bill was heard. There was only time for one group, my understanding is, to come testify against the bill. Is that not correct?
Well, now, Senator, that while literally true, that is not the full picture. I know you want to know. I mean,
that is what happened, is it not?
Well, Senator, you remember Senate Bill 2202, which was debated on this floor, Senator Creighton's bill,
correct,
passed by the Senate. The committee substitute, which was heard, in the meeting you're describing was the exact wording. It was the Senate engrossed version of Senate Bill 2202. So much testimony was taken, long debate here. So the matters in that committee substitute, it was every jot and tittle what was passed in Senate Bill 2202.
But no one...
I just want to make sure I didn't miss that.
I understand what you're saying, but no one had an opportunity to know that, and if they weren't able to make plans to be here.
Senator Menendez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, this is one of 3 amendments that I have. This amendment is simple. And as I look down at the list, I agree with you when we say that these are things that should be included and not exclusive. But I do think it's important that we include and we make sure that we don't leave any groups out. And one of the things that many times what this amendment will do, it seeks to allow the teaching of history of our Asian, American, and Pacific Islanders as a part of the TEKS. And members, as I think about a lot of the things that have happened over the years, I can think of the dangerous conditions that led to thousands of deaths of Chinese laborers who were largely exploited and denied recognition for their contributions. I can think of the Page Act of 1875, which made Asian women the first to be excluded by law from entering into the United States. I can think of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 that prohibited Chinese laborers from immigrating into the United States. And obviously, the Japanese internment camps of 1942 through 1946, where approximately 120,000 Japanese Americans were incarcerated in camps for over 3 years during World War II. And I did a simple search on TEA's website, and I pulled up one of the United States history current TEKS, the courses, and one of the things that I found in there is that there's quite a few things that are things of importance to us. It's not limited, and it's quite extensive. And so I think that this kind of amendment would help make sure that as the TEKS get revisited, if this bill becomes law, that we don't leave any part of our history where we made horrific mistakes that should never happen again. And with that, I move adoption of amendment number 4 to amendment number 1.
Senator Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. President and members, and I thank Senator Menendez for the amendment. The principles that are distilled from these documents that are in the bill, from the Declaration, from the Constitution, from those Federalist Papers, it's those ideas, it's those almost eternal ideas that have allowed us to deal with all the challenges you talked about. I think it's clear that the matters in this bill are not specific events in history or specific eras, but they're those fundamentals. And as Senator Chairman Taylor explained to us, when those TEKS are adopted, as you say, they're already in there. As those TEKS are adopted, all these things will be considered. But on this list, we're talking about those founding documents and those foundational principles. And so knowing that these things will be taught, I do believe they don't belong in this bill. And so I'll be respectfully voting no on the amendment. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, part of America's history. And my goodness, there are also wonderful accomplishments to be discussed in history and today, all the areas in which folks lead. And so again, all those are part of what's going to be taught in school, but they're not part of the list of foundational documents. So with great respect for these topics, I'll be voting no on this amendment, respectfully.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco.
13 ayes, 18 nays. The amendment fails.
This bill states that when a teacher does decide to teach about current events or a widely debated or currently controversial issue, that they must talk about these topics from a diverse and contending perspective without giving deference to any one perspective. End quote. It is important to remember that not all sides of a certain argument are created equal. Some things are just wrong. Whether they take place in history or in current events, as we all know here in this room, because we have passed legislation unanimously. In the years leading up to the horrific events of the Holocaust, Nazism was a widely debated and currently controversial issue at that time. Would it have been right then to teach both sides without giving deference to either? This amendment specifically stipulates that the history of the Holocaust will not be suppressed in Texas schools. It is essential that we teach our children about this history and show them the importance of taking a stand on certain issues. I believe this amendment is especially important when we remember that in this very country of ours that we all love, only 4 years ago, thousands of people marched through the streets of Charlottesville, Virginia, chanting, "Jews will not replace us." I have had many emails from people asking, worried, that if this legislation passes, the proposed bill that we're discussing, that possibly we won't be able to have or ensure that teaching about the Holocaust will remain in place. Members, there are just some topics that are one-sided, and there are viewpoints that are simply wrong. Members, I hope that this amendment, this simple and critically important amendment, is acceptable to the author, because even though I believe it is wrong to get so prescriptive with our educational professionals that I trust, I do believe this is important enough to put into the bill.
Senator Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Senator Menendez, who is my friend and whom I respect, it was as if there was a suggestion that this bill requires somehow moral equivalence of offensive ideas. This bill does not suggest that, and I think we both know that. No, sir, I'm not. I'm speaking on the amendment. This bill is not about specific topics to be taught, as Senator Paxton helped us focus on. It is about certain things that are not to be taught. That's like the idea that one race is inherently superior to another. It's that idea that drove the Holocaust and the unspeakable horrors that came with that. This bill and this list are about these American principles that help us overcome those things and deal with those things. So again, this is taught in American history. It always will be. It always should be. It does not have its place in this bill for setting out these foundational documents. And so I'll be voting no on the amendment.
Secretary, call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Buckingham, Campbell, Creighton.
14 ayes, 17 nays. The amendment fails, and the Holocaust is taught, Senator Menendez, in our schools. Senator Menendez, the Holocaust is taught in our schools.
Mr. President, I'll wait till I'm recognized on my amendment.
I'm sorry. You recognize Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment adds language that includes the history of Mexican Americans to our social study curriculum. As we all know, Mexican American history is Texas history. As we all know, Texas was a part of Mexico until 1836, and countless Mexicans immediately became a part of Texas when it declared its independence. From that moment forward, Mexican and Mexican American communities in Texas have been an integral part of our state's culture, and our state is also home to the highest number of Mexican American students in the country, and our students deserve to be taught about their own history in our schools. It is unfortunate that until recently, Mexican American history had been neglected in our social studies curriculums, and many students have had to take a completely separate class, often an elective, for them to learn about the history of Mexican Americans. The history of Mexican American community is filled with strength and determination, from the dedication of the Bracero men, the advocacy of Dolores Huerta, the community organization of La Raza Unida. Our Mexican American history is rich and embedded into our state. And Senator Hughes, I understand what you said, but the reason that I'm bringing these amendments is because in the bill, it specifically says that they have to provide a perspective to both sides. I quoted you what it said. In the bill. It says here, I quote.
No, sir. No, what?
It says, without giving deference to any one perspective. It's a quote from your bill. And this is the very reason for that. And while I understand that there are many things that are taught in some schools, sometimes when the TEKS has one question or has one mention of something, that's not really teaching it. And that's why I'm presenting these amendments. Because number one, I don't believe we need this bill. But if you're going to have the bill, put things in there that matter to all of us. And that's why I present these amendments.
Senator Hughes, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members. I think it matters to all of us that in Texas schools we don't teach one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex, or that an individual, by virtue of the individual's race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. The forbidden matters in this bill apply equally to all of us, of all races and all backgrounds. But of course, Senator is correct. The Mexican-American history is Texas history. Heavens, think about our heritage and who we are as a people. It's important. It is taught. It's going to be taught. In fact, Senator Taylor told us he's working on development of these TEKS right now. Already covered. This bill, though, is about those foundational documents from that period when America was founded. And so the Mexican-American history is being taught. It needs to be taught. It's Texas history. It's not part of this bill. And so I'll be voting no on this amendment, respectfully.
Members, the motion is on the amendment. Secretary, call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Buckingham, Campbell.
14 ayes, 17 noes. The amendment fails. Senator West, on your amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. President and members. At this time, I would offer floor amendment number 4?
7.
7. And members, what this does, it requires the State Board of Education to take into consideration the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1964, the 13th, 14th, and 19th Amendments to the United States Constitution, and the complexity of the historic relationship between Texas and Mexico and the diversity of the Hispanic population in pulling together the TEKS associated with this particular bill.
Senator Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank Senator West for the amendment. Of course, this makes sense. We've discussed these themes tonight consistently, even with some of Senator Menendez's amendments. Thank you for the amendment. Certainly acceptable to me, and thank you for letting me sign on to it with you. I'm proud to have my name on it. Acceptable to the author.
Members, the motion is on the adoption of the amendment. Any objection? Hearing none. The motion is adopted. The amendment is adopted, excuse me. Senator Menendez, for what purpose?
Thank you, Mr. President. To speak against House Bill 3979.
You are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, it's been a long day, but what we're about to do today is we're about to tell our teachers and our school communities that we just don't trust them. And in the process, we'll shortchange millions of Texas students along the way. Encouraging students to engage in discussions about issues that may be new to them, maybe even controversial, provides them an opportunity to develop empathy, to learn to be respectful of different points of view. The president is correct. 2 years ago, we passed unanimously the Holocaust Remembrance Week bill, a great day in the Texas Senate. Unfortunately, Mr. President, when we have gone to interview school districts and asked them, what do you do for Holocaust Remembrance Week? Not all school districts can answer that they do anything. If any group of adults should understand the importance of developing these skills, it should be us. In this very chamber, we don't always agree. However, each of us finds tremendous value in patience. Senator Hughes, amongst many who has a lot of patience. understanding, decorum. Senator West, you are an example of decorum. And open mind. But most importantly, we should value facts. Often we preach to our teachers in school districts that we need to see more student engagement. What a better way to engage a student than to offer meaningful experiences to connect the course content. What I don't understand is how can we praise and celebrate our teachers for the great work, the long hours, and the above and beyond efforts, like we have recently through COVID, but at the same time, demonstrate to our teachers that we just don't trust them enough to be the educational professionals, the experts in the room, who are capable of making decisions about appropriate delivery of TEKS. Sir Hughes, sometimes I'm surprised, and in this bill I have been perplexed as to why is it that only race and gender are included, but religious affiliation is not. In this society, we have had a tumultuous history and present when it comes to religious persecution. I find it interesting that religion was not mentioned at all in this bill. Kind of makes me feel that the bill is flawed. And what is the true intent of this bill? I'm trying to understand how this will impact the schools, not just in my district, but in this whole state. But in my district, we still suffer from the effects of segregation across our school districts. Will teachers in my district be able to talk about the content of local issues like the landmark school funding case Edgewood versus Kirby, or SAISD versus Rodriguez, which went all the way to the Supreme Court? I can't figure that out because of the effects of this case are still very much controversial and current events. Under this bill, I'm not sure that teachers can live stream the Texas legislature or speak about the Capitol insurrection. Quite frankly, I'm not sure how current events will be defined in this bill for practical use in the classroom. Moreover, we're talking about what the kids are taught in school, but this isn't just about what they're taught. It's about what they experience every day. Senator Blanco and you shared an exchange about what if could kids come up to visit the Capitol? Well, of course they can come up. But we weren't sure as to whether they could get credit. According to what I've read in your bill, they won't be able to get credit for just coming to the Capitol. And maybe we shouldn't encourage that. I'm not sure. The fact is that even the fact that we're having to question this is sad to me. I'm not sure how boys' state or girls' state is going to work under the confines of this. I've been contacted by many, many teachers, not just in my district, but around the state, and they feel, frankly, disrespected. They feel that the hours that they spend on the rigorous professional development, honing their craft, focusing on the unique needs of their specific community, is all for naught. When we come in and we tell them, you're not quite qualified to make decisions about how you teach in your classroom. And I know that the words on that piece of paper here in this bill, on the one we got a few hours ago, don't specifically say that. But when you tell them about what they can't be compelled or they can, and that they have to provide that very carefully worded perspective without giving deference to any one perspective. It just says, well, we're going to give you some guardrails. I think that students need to learn about the past and the present. They need a chance to review and to draw their own conclusions about the different perspectives. This is a part of our democracy that we all hold so dear. And it's almost perplexing how beginning, we talk about these great founding documents. But those documents, as near and dear as we hold them, there's a lot of case law that shows that not even they are perfect. If we think about Brown versus a board, talking about desegregation, if we think about Sweat versus Painter, separate but equal, Obergefell versus Hodges, same-sex marriage, we have a litany of tastes that we should think about how those things impact current history. Mr. President, members, information and knowledge is power. And I believe we should be empowering our teachers and allowing them to empower our students. I believe, as it was said earlier by my good friend Senator West, this is a first step, but it's in the wrong direction. Unfortunately, this bill makes a mistake that many of our students may pay for in the years to come. Thank you for your patience and understanding, and this is why I'll be voting against the committee substitute of Senate House Bill 3979. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members. I thank each one for their patience and indulgence as we discuss difficult matters tonight, as we listened to last night and this morning, as we listen to one another and discuss these things, difficult things to discuss. The subject matter of this bill is one that it would be easy for us to ignore. Much more comfortable and much more convenient for us just to not bring these matters up. But we all recognize, and we've all discussed tonight, we have work to do. We have miles before we sleep and promises to keep when it comes to these matters. And so I thank you, Senator West, for what you said. And as Senator Paxton put it, this bill describes both sides of the coin. On the one hand, very importantly, what do we teach? What are those fundamental American values that must infuse our social studies curriculum so that we can overcome these things and move on and move past racism and see it a thing of the past, more of a relic of the past? What are those values? And we know where they come from. It's those uniquely American values. We don't brag about this, but we are thankful. We are so thankful for this unique system, this country where everybody still wants to come, and this country that still produces more of the wealth by far, the wealth, the philanthropy, the blessing of others, the lifting of others out of poverty here and abroad. And so we want to stress those things. And yes, some things have reared their head in some of our schools that are offensive to everyone on this floor. We don't have to read them again, but I think we've all stated we agree that to say that one race or one sex is superior to another, that's offensive. It's inhuman, it's un-American, and we all agree with that. It's not pleasant to talk about that, but I hope we agree. As Senator Paxton said, these things must not be taught in our schools. That's what we seek to accomplish here as we think about our history and the span of our history and each one of our individual American stories. I know most of you very well. And I'll be blunt, many of you have great advantages over me in terms of your natural abilities. Many of you went to more prestigious schools, have a better pedigree in many ways. And yet each one of us is a neat story of success. And none of our stories are complete. We're still working, we're still striving, still trying to do better, trying to lift others up with us. That's true of all the people we represent. Do some people in America have advantages over others? Yes. Is there racism to address? Yes. Oh, it is. It's here. It's not what it was, but it's here. It's got to be addressed. Yes, Senator West. We want to learn to move past it, to deal with it. And Senator Menendez, those topics you discussed, and my desk mate, Senator Powell, of course, horrible things in our history like the Holocaust will be taught, must be taught, will always be taught. We can never forget those things. In fact, later today we'll have a resolution dealing with some of those matters. I hope we can all join in. But as we think of all these matters, may I just say, I believe it all does come back to those founding principles. And I'm delicate. I quote delicately Dr. King. I want to handle these things carefully, knowing all that he accomplished and all that he means to so many of us, and a whole lot more to some of us. But he talked about the America that he envisioned. And remember, he said his dream was deeply rooted in the American dream. He did not see America as inherently racist or our institutions as so flawed that we can never recover. And no one here does either. But he sure didn't believe that. And remember, he said he dreamed that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. And that's what this bill's about. Let's focus on the true meaning of our creed. And together, let's lift each other up. Let's all rise to that. I tell you what, I grew up, we didn't have a whole lot, but I was taught just like every one of you was taught. I was taught that in America, no matter the color of your skin, no matter what your parents did or who they are, no matter where you were born, no matter if you've tried and failed, in America, if you work hard and trust the Lord and play by the rules, you can succeed, you can do better, and you can lift others up with you. And I think you know that. No place else in the world do people grow up believing that. That's a uniquely American thing. You're living it, you know it, you're helping your constituents live it, and that's what this bill's about. So I thank you for your patience as we talk through it, and as I sum up, as I go to my seat, I can't think of any better words than one from a great American from a generation ago. This is someone who grew up in a poor working class family and worked hard and used his gifts and blessed people and rose to the highest levels. And here's what he said to a group of students. As we think about what we teach our students, teaching all of our history, warts and all, and learning from it, as we think of that, I'll leave you with these words. He said, "Take full advantage of the wonderful life that lies in store for you. Rejoice in your freedom. Sample the full richness of the opportunities that lie before you. Help one another. Trust in yourselves and have faith in God. And you'll find more joy and happiness than you could imagine. And always remember that you are Americans, and it is your birthright to dream great dreams in this sweet and blessed land, truly the greatest, freest, strongest nation on earth. May it ever be so." And with these solemn thoughts in mind, I move final passage, House Bill 3979.
Members, we've had many moments on this floor since I've been Lieutenant Governor and Senator where the best of us comes out. And tonight was one of those nights for everyone who spoke from your heart. Together, 31 members talking about things that need to be talked about. So thank you, Senator Hughes. Thank you, Senator West, Senator Miles, Senator Menendez, Senator Paxton, Senator Betancourt. Did I leave out Senator Taylor, Senator Eckhart, everyone who spoke? Thank you for sharing your heart, because all of us have one thing in common. We want a great Texas and a great America for everyone. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Buckingham, Campbell, Creighton.
18 ayes and 13 noes. The bill finally passes. Thank you, Senator.